Go ahead and start with what is really la necesidad, the need in Puerto Rico. So what you're looking at is Puerto Rico. Show of hands, how many people have visited Puerto Rico? Okay, so most people like go here to San Juan and they stop and they pretty much party and drink here, and this is what they get to know of Puerto Rico. Our service area is in the what you're seeing. If you can see my cursor, it's in the central north or the central western part of the island. Puerto Rico is 100 by 35 miles approximately. And this is a study that was done, a LiDAR study, which is basically an aircraft that flies using laser, and it does a delta. This is a delta before and after Hurricane Maria. And what you're seeing in red are the landslides. And what you're seeing, for example, in Utuado right here, there were over 45,000 landslides in that area just alone after Hurricane Maria. Now, if any of you have traveled through Puerto Rico, all the roads, especially in the center, you'll know that all the roads are straight, just like that. And then a lot of communities only have one road coming in and one road going out. So when you have a landslide, it is actually very easy to leave a community completely disconnected with no way to get in and out until you bring in heavy equipment or other things like that that might be able to open that path. And that's not including the fact that maybe some of the roads were actually washed away entirely. So or went away. So and what I try to serve by this map, and I think this is very true of the United States in general, is that the needs of the mountains are very different than the needs of the other places, like the coastal ranges, which didn't really suffer from landslides. They had their other issues. And I think that what we mean by to identify here is that needs are different by geography, by region, by economy, by all the other factors that go into deciding how we are going to address that. But that same need can also represent an opportunity. So, for example, that same geography of mountains that is highly mobile when it gets saturated with soil, that mountain system is a karst system. It's a geological formation that basically creates these mountainous cones. If you wanted to travel to see these, the ones that you probably see on your computer screen would be like the dragon's teeth that you might see in China or Vietnam. It has that same kind of geography, conical mountains creating very steep gradients, creating these deeper valleys. And those valleys actually are really great that when you actually put walls, dams behind them, you can actually store water. So in Puerto Rico, there's actually no natural lakes. There's no natural lakes in the entire island. Any lake that is formed in Puerto Rico has been man-made. And these lakes, if you want to talk about the development of Puerto Rico, these reservoirs actually represent how Puerto Rico developed. So the first reservoirs that were created were actually for irrigation. To do what? To be able to irrigate the cane fields. So sugar cane was a big crop in the late 1800s, middle of the 1800s, late 1800s. And then finally they realized that, well, we could do more than just store the water for irrigation. We could actually generate electricity off of it. So the very first electricity systems in Puerto Rico are hydroelectric systems. And those start being developed in the late 1930s. And in particular, what you're looking at is the chain of Caunillas and Dos Bocas. This is Dos Bocas up here, two mouths from the river. And this is Caunillas, which is named after some of the tribal lands. And then we have three gen houses there. Well, I shouldn't say we do. Prepa does. The Puerto Rico Energy Power Authority has that. But that is the opportunity that we see there to actually come and restore those hydroelectrics. So the mission of the Cooperativa is very simple. It's to provide cost-effective and resilient energy from renewable sources for its owner partners. And we intend to provide energy for about 95,000 people when it's all said and done with our project. And the objectives that we have for the project is basically threefold. One is to acquire, rehabilitate, and manage the Caunillas and Dos Bocas hydroelectric plants. We want to also offer, so we believe resiliency is stacked. And I invite anybody that is a serious energy community leader to look at your own resiliency and think about stacking those in tiers. So we believe that the hydroelectrics provide that base generation. And then on the other extreme, that Hurricane Maria event where everything breaks down and you want to just keep communities stable, well, then that would be our photovoltaic systems. And then in between those two, Then we can also provide a second tier of resiliency, which would be Puerto Rico's first intermunicipal microgrid. So the vision basically is use the hydroelectrics as base generation. We have a project, and I'm going to explain it a bit, Renfoco, which is that last tier resiliency, create that intermunicipal microgrid. But the totality of that will actually allow us to create a virtual power plant. And that VPP actually brings a lot more resiliency and other capabilities for the communities. So we have three main projects. Hidroenergía Renace, so this will be a test of your high school and college Spanish. Hidroenergía Renace means hydro energy reborn. Those hydroelectric plants are in very bad condition, and we believe that with the attention of the community, we can actually restore those to their full potential. In fact, improve them because they haven't been improved at all since they were installed. We have Renfoco. Renfoco is an acronym. The acronym is Resiliencia Energética Fotovoltaica Comunitaria. That roughly translates to community resilience through photovoltaics. And then we have Microred de la Montaña, which is microgrid of the mountain, which creates Puerto Rico's first intermunicipal microgrid. Hidroenergía Renace, Hydro Energy Reborn, as I said, contemplates the rehabilitation and restoration of these hydroelectrics. This is an example of the karst system where you see these conical mountains. It's very beautiful up there. That reservoir that you're looking at has lost 76% of its capacity. You will see a tree, I remember seeing trees that wouldn't move for months in the middle of the reservoir. And when you actually found out their branches were only 6 feet down, that's how shallow that you've lost. And that typically happens, when you don't do any kind of remediation measures on your reservoirs. That gen house down here, this is the Dos Bocas. This was, constructed in 1942. The building, it has 3 generators in there, for example, each one 6 megawatts, nameplate peak capacity nominal at 5 megawatts. The one generator was installed in 42, 43, and 44. None of these, that it's very important to note that this generation, when it was created, never went to the communities that actually built those hydroelectric plants. These hydroelectric plants actually where the generation went to the south and the north to provide electricity for the crops. So it really kind of tells you, what was the value system, what was important, who was going to be the real consumers of that electricity. That electricity back in the day, if we have hand map time, Puerto Rico again, 35 by 100, that these plants could actually provide the entire energy for the entire north to south center of the island. That's how low the consumption was in the 1940s. If you go to the U.S. Congressional Library and you do a search for Utuado, 1940s, you will see children with no pants, no shoes, distended bellies, because there was subsistence farming and a lot of people that were actually starving in those time frames. And I would say that's the late 30s, early 40s, and then finally, as part of some of the programs that were happening in the United States, Puerto Rico got some of those benefits, and then at that point, then became the process of the industrialization of Puerto Rico, which included energy generation at the hydroelectric level. And that was known as Operation Bootstrap, basically gave some of the first impetus to the industrialization of Puerto Rico that still very much dominates its economy. Puerto Rico's economy now no longer depends on agriculture. In fact, Puerto Rico imports more than 85% of its own food that it consumes, which is a problem, a tenuous and very risky problem, especially if there's natural disasters. And then but now the Puerto Rican economy largely depends on light manufacturing. So if I was going to say, show me you don't care about hydroelectrics without saying that you don't care about hydroelectrics, these would be the pictures, these would be the images I would show you. This is actually a reservoir, and I wish I would have left this in the picture here. This is behind the reservoir. Now, mind you, this should be about 15 to 20 feet of water, and just out of frame over here was a horse, which should have been underwater by twice its height. And this is the other end of it. And this is an example of how that whole chain has been allowed by PREPA to go into disuse. Now, in part, I can't blame PREPA because these hydroelectric plants, were it back in the day, and it was great. But when Puerto Rico started industrializing, 43 megawatts, which was the nameplate peak capacity of the entire chain, wouldn't have been enough. They had to start bringing online 600 megawatt plants like Palo Seco and all the rest. So Puerto Rico right now requires about between 2.1 and 2.3 gigawatts to power its in the entire grid right now. So they actually made a decision to not invest in this anymore, but it's a real shame because these are the only resources that actually provide black start capability for the island. How many of you know what black start capability means? Show of hands, black start capability? Nope, foreign. Okay. It's a foreign concept to you because you have reliable electricity. You never have a situation where you lose electricity. Puerto Rico loses electricity frequently. Last week, there were just 2 outages in Adjuntas where I was working at that time. One lasted for an entire 8 hours, and you could hear all the generators rattling everywhere where people were trying to provide some level of electricity. And then the next couple of days, then it went out for a couple hours. We don't have, like in the United States, where you might have a little flickering, a little dimming of the lights as the frequency or voltage changes. We actually have sustained outages to this day, 6 years after Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria left some parts of the island that in our service area without electricity for over a year. Now, I want you to think about that. When you don't have electricity is actually a continuum in the 21st century. The first thing that electricity does is it provides you with an absolute essential to life, which is water. If you lost electricity, you are more likely going to be without water. And then if you lose electricity, the next thing that goes is community health. Because all those pipes that are typically leaking some amount, the natural vectors around those pipes start making them into the pipes. And that's why you might get on occasion a boil alert or something like that. Well, in Hurricane Maria, all that natural stuff started going in there. That's why we had an 18-year-old non-immunocompromised young man die of leptospirosis in the center of Utuado. Leptospirosis, if you typically want to get leptospirosis, you're typically a hog farmer that is not taking care of all your swine. So then after community health goes, the next thing that goes is economic activity and economic development. Because if you can't have community health, there's no way you can start talking to people about health, about economic activity. If you have to spend your entire day looking for water, forget about trying to worry about that next email or that next, installation or the next repair. That goes away. So then when you actually look at the continuum, electricity is actually essential for both. It's essential at the linchpins, both linchpins. One is to anchor community health, and the other is to actually enable economic activity, which you can't do without electricity either. So these are the kind of things that are present to us when we think about this. Now, the Hidroeléctrica Renace project, we believe we have a very different vision for these resources than PREPA. PREPA just uses this to basically sustain voltage. Actually, of all the 6 generators, only 2 of them work, and only 2 of them work as of recently. For the longest time, it was only 1. And that 1 generator was actually what restarted the grid after Hurricane Maria. So ironically, the least attended, least cared for resource was actually the resource. So I don't know if you know about how this works, but if you lost all electricity in an area or region, you actually have to start repowering up the grid. And to repower up the grid, the first thing you have to do is start opening up all the connections. Because, and then again, not patronizing anybody here, I'm just going to kind of share some of these principles, but electricity generation has to match demand. You can't have too much generation without demand. The generators will not be able to connect to the grid. You can't have, so they have to balance out. So the first thing you have to do is if you have electric, and here's a good example of this. There was a 400 megawatt plant in the south that was ready to go I'd say 2 months after Hurricane Maria. It literally couldn't connect to the grid because it was only connected up to the 115 kV and the 230 kV lines. There's so much impedance in those lines that it was just too much resistance. So every time they tried connecting up that plant, it would all knock down because the grid wasn't working. So what they eventually had to do was create other lines at 38 kV, add in about 18 megawatts of demand, and then they were able to start connecting up some of the plants up to the grid. So a black start situation is a very, very serious situation where you actually have to open up all the circuits, you have to disconnect them, and then you have to start basically reconnecting little by little by little to re-energize the grid. In Puerto Rico, re-energizing the grid takes about 3 days, okay? 3 full days, if everything is working. But you don't know what is on the ground, what is working, what is not. So you actually have to open everything up, and then you have to go inspect all these lines. And these lines are all over the place, sometimes right over mountains, sometimes by the sides of roads. So can you imagine the task of going out there to safely re-energize the grid takes not just 3 days, it would take literally months and months, assuming there were no repairs needed. So these are some of the challenges that happen on an islanded community. But right now, as it stands, PREPA doesn't even use these for generation. They use it for voltage control. They use that these hydroelectric plants are fantastic for what would be a DERS. Anybody know what a DERS is? Distributed energy resource. So the, distributed energy resource, that's the common vernacular for things like a microgrid, a battery, those can all be distributed energy resources, DERS. And that is an industry term, just so you guys know. So with those DERS, then basically we believe that these hydroelectric plants with only 43 megawatts, which we believe we can improve to 50 megawatts, wouldn't really move the needle for all of Puerto Rico. But for the center of the island, it would be absolutely fantastic because in the center of the island, the consumption in the agricultural rural areas is much lower. So that is Hidroenergía Renace. Our next project is Renfoco, okay? Resiliencia energética fotovoltaica comunitaria, energy resilience through community resilience through photovoltaics. Basically, this is consisting of microgrids. And I think I'm going to just preface right now that we have another project called Microred de la Montaña, which is microgrid of the mountain. They're two different projects, okay? Microgrid of the mountain is joining 4 municipalities together with a resiliency ring, and I'll explain more about that. This is about supporting small communities. So what is Renfoco? Renfoco is, it consists of 10 megawatts with 20 megawatt hours of storage distributed across 5 municipalities, focused on supporting small businesses, community centers, including churches and refuges, refuge centers, and residences as needed to power up the businesses. So I want you to highlight this very important focus. This is not a residential program. Residential, with all due respect to Doña Pepa and Don Juan Pueblo, powering up their homes doesn't help stabilize the community. It helps them. What helps stabilize the community is powering up the grocery store, the pharmacy, the laboratory, the medical clinic, the colmado, which would be like a bodega, I think is what most of you would be familiar with. It's about powering up these small businesses, even the barber shop, even the beauty shop. These are important services that, especially in small communities, have multiple uses. For example, the beauty shop, where this microgrid that you're looking at that we have installed, that beauty shop actually is the community bank because they do all the payment processing from there. You wouldn't know that unless you were in the community. But that's the example of how you can provide resiliency. So these microgrids, we have 2 in this community of Castañer, that stabilizes a population of about 6,000 people. 6,000 people in the area that would use this as a focal point for their support services. And that young lady there was a couple of years ago helped us energize the microgrid, and we also have 2 car chargers. Now, I'll just give you a little story about those car chargers. I was initially very hesitant and resistant about putting in car chargers. I thought the optics wouldn't be very good. This is about supporting small communities. These are very poor communities. In the service area we serve in, 58% of the population is below the federal poverty level. And I'm not talking about like $1 or $2 below the federal poverty level. 58% below the poverty level. We have we just were working a case with a mother who is 67, taking care of her 92-year-old mother who is bedridden. They need air conditioning to keep her from getting bed sores. And she's on a ventilator, so she needs 24/7. Now, anything with a motor kills batteries. If you guys know anything about, storage, anything that goes whir is going to be a huge draw on energy. So you have to put in PV and batteries, and you're seeing here 4 batteries with our 4 inverters on this microgrid. And I think what's important to recognize here is that they live on $8,600 a year gross. $8,600 a year gross. The tariff in Puerto Rico for electricity at the residential rate is 27 cents per kilowatt hour. So you have very poor people on fixed income with a very high energy cost and very particular energy needs to be able to sustain life. And this, I think, is part of the challenge that we're resolving with the Cooperativa. So I was very concerned about these car chargers. Why? Do we know any car less than $35,000 that's electric? So I was resistant to this initially, but then my team, kind of talked about it, like saying, no, this, it could send a really good message and all the rest. And, credit to my team. I think they were right. Now, that said, so a $110,000 car was outside parked charging with one of our chargers. And I get the photo and I'm thinking, this is a nightmare. This is exactly what I didn't want. That car cost as much as the total businesses that were part of the microgrid make in a year. But that community is so proud about these chargers. This actually was a great gain for the community. So forgetting about the optics, in terms of pride of the community, this is the first time this community was at the leading edge of technology instead of being the very last. These are communities that went without electricity for so long, and now they actually had the ability to engage with the 21st century. So sometimes, these systems, which obviously provide an economic benefit, provide a resiliency benefit, they can also provide a moral benefit. They can provide a motivational benefit. They can provide hope. And these 2 car chargers have actually turned out to be that, because they're, even though they don't, have any electric vehicles, they're able to point that Castañer has a car charger. And I think that's a very important message to share as well. So the Proyecto Reenfoco, like I said, 10 megawatts of PV, all rooftop. We don't touch a single square inch of soil, in part because of agricultural concerns, in part because we don't want to get into environmental studies. Under our tariff and rate, we actually are lower than PREPA, and underneath that includes all O&M services. It includes the insurance, and all of these systems are designed to be eligible for net metering. How many of you know what net metering is? Net metering? Okay, great. Thank you, Corbin. Anybody else? And okay. So all of this includes net metering. A spell check. I translated this from Spanish right before this presentation, and project is proyecto in Spanish. I got rid of the O, but not the Y for the J. But the project, when we go for the total, is about $37 million. And it will provide a savings of approximately $27 million for the beneficiaries of the microgrids over the lifetime. This is actually the deal structure of Reenfoco. I think that what's very important to highlight is that not all innovation is technological. And I think that's very important for the team that's here in the fellowship with PSEF, is that your innovation is not always a technological solution. It is also social, it is also community innovation, and it's also about how to view these opportunities differently. So what we've been able to do is we're basically bringing the advances that would typically be reserved for a multinational corporation to the community level. By bringing, and this is something that PSEF also has, when I remember when I first started talking with PSEF, that one of the innovations that they've packed in, we had identified that, and we'd already built up a model around it. But basically, just to roll through this map really quickly, The cooperative is all in green. Everything starts with the cooperative. I do not have a translated version of this. Everything starts with the dueños socios. Dueños socios are the owner partners, and basically they exercise, they make payments, they exercise supervision and control over the board of directors, and they have a voice and a vote. And I think that's very important. For a population and a community that has been largely dispossessed, left end of line, that do not have any resources organically themselves, to have a vote in their energy generation, distribution, and consumption is empowerment. It's an exercise in community rebirth, which I think is very important. So basically, these owners enter into a energy service contract with the cooperative. The cooperative then has its own operations department, but basically enters into a contract with Renfoco, which is a special purpose entity. Renfoco is a separate corporation, wholly owned subsidiary. We're actually thinking of giving it its own separate board of directors as well to take advantage of some additional separation. But basically, we enter into a PPA between Renfoco and the cooperative makes payments here. What you're seeing here is all the other stakeholders. We could have basically some initial grants. I would substitute this with Vivienda. Instead of Vivienda, we would substitute this right now with Department of Energy and USDA if I was going to change that. For example, we have been assigned 3.4 million by DOE matched. We have to come up with 1.2 million, which we hope to work with PSEF on, to be able to do basically 10 microgrids at 4.7 million. We also were invited by USDA to apply for the PACE program for 37 million. So this project, we're on track to make this a reality. I will add, the DOE funds will create 10 microgrids. The 37 million will create 82 microgrids. I think not just within Puerto Rico, not even with the United States. I don't know that within the world, there is going to be one single entity that will have 92 microgrids under its management. Now, these are small microgrids. Average size is 100 kilowatts. But that is enough in the central region that we're at, that can provide 4 to 6 businesses all of their energy needs, and largely make them resilient to a total loss of energy with basic changes in their operations. One of the innovations I really like here is this triangle here, which basically Renfoco contracts with technical assistance. That technical assistance helps pass skill sets onto the cooperative. This mechanism here basically accelerates the development of the cooperative. The cooperative itself was incorporated in the 14th of August of 2019, but I say that we're still in diapers. We're just, I think we're just about to get out of with what we've worked out. We're out of the crawling stage. We're going to get into the toddling and right into running stage very quickly in 2024. So one of the valid questions is, how do you develop your organization? And I think this is a valid question for any of you as community leaders and any of you that are starting your own projects. How do you develop your organization? How do you bring capacity? Well, one of the things that we did is we requested a USDA grant, and we were given that USDA grant, and we created 17 operations manuals that are in English and in Spanish. And we share those no charge for any community organization that's creating a cooperative. And these operations manuals include security, compliance, customer service, operations and maintenance, all the things that you would need to get started on that trajectory of how to accelerate the development of the capacity of the cooperative. New 38 kV lines that create a resiliency ring, putting together the 4 municipalities. And another thing that we recently were selected for this past Friday was DOE's Communities LEAP program, which equates to about $500,000 worth of technical assistance, which we'll use to actually fine-tune the design of this system. And then when you wrap this all up together, this will allow us and all of these will have grid scale batteries behind the substations. So this resiliency ring will allow us to shift energy back and forth between the very different municipalities, powered by a combination of the hydroelectrics and also the PV that we'll have on rooftops, that will be able to inject into the grid and also charge up not only the local batteries, but the grid scale batteries. The last element that I'll share before I'm cut off is the job training program. So again, this goes with a 4-step process where we've already completed the first part, which is the operations manuals based on subject matter experts. The next part that we'll be doing is the development of the program itself, which will include and 3 phases where the subject matter experts actually start doing the work themselves while we get non-skilled people that are locally in the community that don't know about these things. They might not know about compliance. They might not know about customer service. They might not know about O&M. But then they're basically in the back pocket of those subject matter experts. And then after a while, we switch them out, and now they do the work under the supervision of the subject matter experts. And the final part is actually an audit, where using the operations manuals and their experience, the subject matter experts certify that they are ready to provide that that information.